It all started with a whisper, a quiet, desperate idea that grew louder with every wildfire that turned cities orange, every flood that swallowed towns whole, and every report that said the planet was running out of time. By 2047, people weren't just worried anymore. They were exhausted, tired of arguing, tired of watching glaciers vanish on the news, tired of breathing air that stung their eyes even on good days. Something had to give. That's when the Global Stewardship Council stepped forward. They weren't politicians or celebrities. They were scientists, ecologists, engineers, and elders from communities that had lived close to the land for generations. Together, they proposed something no one had dared suggest before. What if humans just stepped back? Not forever, but for a while, 50 years. Long enough for forests to regrow without chainsaws cutting them down, for oceans to clear without plastic choking them, for animals to roam without roads slicing through their homes. At first, most people laughed. Leave the planet? Where are we supposed to go? But the council had a plan. They called it the Great Retreat. Instead of scattering across the wild, everyone would move into massive, self-sustaining arcologies, giant, sealed cities built from recycled materials powered by clean fusion energy, with farms stacked floor after floor like living skyscrapers. Water would be purified and reused. Waste would become fuel. Everything would be designed to run with almost zero impact on the outside world. The idea sounded like science fiction, but the world was out of patience for half measures. After a summer when heat waves killed thousands and entire coral reefs turned ghost white overnight, public opinion shifted. People began asking, what if this is our only shot? A global vote was held, not perfect, not unanimous, but enough. The retreat was approved. What followed was the most organized migration in human history. Governments, corporations, and communities worked together in ways no one thought possible. Old suburbs were emptied. Coastal towns were carefully dismantled. Families packed up not just belongings but memories, photos of beaches now too acidic for swimming, jars of soil from gardens that would soon be reclaimed by wildflowers. There were tears, yes, but also a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in decades, humanity wasn't fighting over resources. It was sharing a single mission. Inside the arcologies, life felt different. The air smelled faintly of ozone and herbs from the vertical farms. Windows showed digital sunrises because real ones were now outside the sealed walls. Kids played in parks made of recycled rubber and synthetic grass, while adults worked in labs, classrooms, or maintenance tunnels that kept the whole system humming. It wasn't perfect. Some missed the smell of rain on real dirt, the sound of crickets at night, but most agreed. If this gave Earth a fighting chance, it was worth it. Meanwhile, cameras left behind in the wild began sending back images that stunned everyone. Within weeks, deer wandered through empty parking lots, wild boars rooted through overgrown backyards. In places once packed with traffic, silence settled like a blanket. Birds returned to city centers, nesting in abandoned office buildings. Rivers no longer choked with runoff ran clearer than they had in a century. From space, satellites showed green spreading across continents like a slow healing breath. The council watched it all from their command center deep inside the largest arcology. They didn't celebrate, not yet. But in quiet moments, some allowed themselves to hope. Maybe they'd gotten it right. Maybe stepping away was the kindest thing humans had ever done for the planet. Of course, no one realized then that nature doesn't run on human logic. That ecosystems aren't just waiting to be left alone. They're woven together with threads humans had spent centuries tugging at, sometimes carelessly, sometimes with care. And when you pull out one thread too fast, the whole fabric can start to unravel. But that truth wouldn't reveal itself for a few more months. For now, the world held its breath. Humans were gone from the wild. And for the first time in generations, Earth was quiet. The silence felt like peace. But peace, as they would soon learn, can be fragile. Inside the arcologies, people tried to stay busy. They watched the live feeds from the outside like it was a nature documentary, only this time they were the ones who'd left the screen. Children drew pictures of bears in shopping malls and fish swimming through subway tunnels. Teachers used the footage to explain food chains, carbon cycles, and why bees mattered. There was a sense of pride, even reverence. We did this. We gave them space. Yet beneath the calm, a question lingered in the back of many minds, unspoken but growing. What if we misunderstood everything? For now, though, the data looked good. CO2 levels were dropping. Reforestation was happening faster than expected. Endangered species sightings increased. The council issued cautious updates, always careful not to declare victory too soon. But in private meetings, they allowed themselves small smiles. Maybe, just maybe, humanity's final act wouldn't be destruction, but generosity. They didn't know it yet. But the planet had other plans, and generosity, without understanding, can sometimes do more harm than good. Still, in those early days of the retreat, hope was real. People gathered in arcology plazas to watch sunsets projected on giant screens, knowing the real ones were happening over empty highways and silent farms. They told stories about the old world, not with regret, but with lessons. "We messed up," one elder said during a community circle. "But maybe leaving was our way of saying sorry." Outside, the wind blew through open windows of abandoned houses. A fox curled up on a sofa in a living room overgrown with ivy. Somewhere in the Arctic, a polar bear walked across sea ice that hadn't been this thick in 30 years. It felt like a new beginning, and for a little while it really was. The first few months after the Great Retreat felt like holding your breath underwater. Quiet, tense, but strangely peaceful. Inside the arcologies, life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings began with the soft chime of wake-up alerts instead of birdsong. Meals came from trays stacked with lab-grown vegetables and protein patties that tasted surprisingly close to chicken. People walked on clean, climate-controlled paths, past walls glowing with digital forests that changed with the seasons. It wasn't home, not the kind anyone remembered, but it worked. And for now, that was enough. Outside, the world transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Cameras mounted on old streetlights, rooftops, and even weather balloons sent back footage that played on public screens in every arcology. At first, it was like watching a miracle unfold in slow motion. Deer stepped cautiously onto highways, their hooves clicking on cracked asphalt. Packs of wild dogs, descendants of lost pets, roamed suburbs, not as threats, but as curious explorers. In coastal towns, seals hauled themselves onto piers no longer crowded with tourists. Dolphins leapt in harbors once choked with oil slicks. Kids gathered around these screens like they were campfire stories. "Look, a bear in a grocery store," one would shout, pointing at grainy footage of a black bear sniffing through empty aisles, shelves still lined with dusty cans. Adults watched too, often in silence. There was something humbling about seeing nature move back in so quickly, so confidently, as if humans had never been there at all. Scientists in the arcologies pored over data day and night. Oxygen levels in the Amazon were rising. Coral in the Great Barrier Reef showed faint signs of regrowth, tiny polyps clinging to bleached skeletons trying again. Insects returned to meadows that had been paved over for decades. Even the air, measured by drones flying over former cities, was cleaner than it had been since the 1800s. The planet wasn't just healing, it was thriving. Inside the arcologies, morale lifted. People started calling it the quiet miracle. Art classes painted scenes of wolves in city parks. Musicians composed songs about rivers running free. Community gardens, though entirely indoors, began labeling their produce with hopeful names like Tomorrow's Tomato or Second Chance Spinach. There was a shared feeling. Maybe we finally did something right, but not everything was perfect. Life inside the arcologies was safe, yes, but also small. No one could feel real wind on their face. No one could jump in a lake or dig their hands into soil. Some missed the unpredictability of the old world, the way thunderstorms rolled in without warning, or how a walk in the woods could lead to a hidden waterfall. Now everything was controlled, scheduled, recycled. Even emotions felt a little recycled sometimes. Still, most agreed it was a fair trade. "We gave up comfort to give Earth a chance," someone said during a town hall meeting, and the room nodded in quiet agreement. After all, what was a little boredom compared to saving the planet? The council, watching from their central hub, allowed themselves cautious optimism. Daily reports showed biodiversity indexes climbing. Carbon capture from regrowing forests exceeded projections. For the first time in over a century, the global ecological footprint had dropped to near zero. They issued a statement. "The retreat is working, Nature is responding. People celebrated in small ways. Extra dessert rations, a night of open mic, storytelling, a dance party in the main plaza under simulated stars. Hope, fragile but real, began to take root inside the arcologies, just as wildflowers were doing outside. Yet beneath the surface, tiny cracks were starting to show, ones no one noticed at first. In parts of Europe, forests that had been carefully managed for centuries began to grow too dense. Without humans to clear underbrush or conduct controlled burns, dry leaves and dead wood piled up like kindling. In North America, farms that once rotated crops now sat empty, and invasive plants, ones that had been kept in check by plows and herbicides, started spreading like wildfire. Literally. In one region, a lightning strike sparked a blaze that burned for weeks unchecked because there was no one left to fight it. But these were seen as minor setbacks. Nature knows how to balance itself, a scientist reassured a worried citizen during a Q&A session. We just need to trust the process. Meanwhile, in the ocean, something stranger was happening. With fishing fleets gone, fish populations exploded, but not evenly. Some species, like jellyfish, multiplied wildly without predators to keep them in check. Others, like certain reef fish that depended on human-maintained coral nurseries, began to vanish. The ocean wasn't just recovering, it was rearranging itself in ways no model had predicted. Still, the overall message remained positive. The arcologies hummed along, people adapted. Children born after the retreat didn't even miss the outside world, they'd never known it. To them, green meant the glow of vertical farms, and wild was a word from history lessons. But then came the first real warning sign. A monitoring drone flying over a former nuclear storage site in Eastern Europe sent back an alert, structural integrity failing. Without human engineers to inspect and maintain the containment seals, rainwater had seeped into the foundation. It wasn't a disaster yet, but it could become one. The council quietly dispatched a remote repair bot, but it got stuck in overgrown vegetation. No one had accounted for how fast nature would reclaim even the most industrial places. Similar reports trickled in. Dams in Asia showed stress fractures. Chemical plants in the U.S. rusted from the inside out. Old landfills, once lined and monitored, began leaking into groundwater, now that no one was testing it. At first, the council downplayed these issues. Isolated incidents, they called them. The long-term benefit outweighs short-term risks. But inside private meetings, voices grew tense. We assumed Earth would heal on its own, one scientist admitted, rubbing tired eyes. But what if it needs us, not to dominate but to tend? No one had an answer. Outside, the silence deepened. No engines, no voices, no music drifting from open windows. Just wind, rain, animal calls, and the slow creak of buildings giving way to time. It was beautiful and unnerving. Inside the arcologies, people kept watching the screens, still hoping. Still believing. They didn't know it yet, but the planet wasn't just healing, it was changing. And some of those changes didn't care whether humans were watching or not. For now, though, life went on. Kids played, adults worked. The artificial sun rose and set, and the world outside kept breathing, deeply, wildly, unpredictably. No one realized that silence could be a warning. They thought it was peace. But peace without presence can sometimes be the calm before something much worse. It started with a flicker on a screen, just a small red alert in the corner of a monitoring dashboard deep inside the main arcology. No one paid much attention at first. False alarms happened all the time. But then another one popped up, and another. Within a week, the alerts weren't just red. They were blinking, urgent, impossible to ignore. Outside, the world wasn't healing the way they'd hoped. It was unraveling. At first, it was easy to explain away. A wildfire in what used to be California. Sure, it was big, but lightning strikes happen. Then came news of a dam in South America cracking under pressure from unchecked plant growth and shifting soil. No one was there to monitor the stress points. No engineers to reinforce the walls. When it finally gave way, it flooded valleys that had just started to recover, washing away young trees and nesting birds in a muddy rush. People inside the arcology still tried to stay calm. Nature finds a way, someone said during a community meeting, trying to sound reassuring. But the phrase rang hollow now. Then came the oceans. Without fishing boats, fish numbers had surged, but not the right kinds. Jellyfish bloomed in massive, gelatinous clouds, clogging the gills of other sea life. Coral reefs, starved of the tiny fish that used to clean them, began to suffocate under algae. In places where humans once ran coral nurseries or removed invasive starfish, silence now reigned, and with it, slow decay. The ocean wasn't bouncing back. It was tipping into a new, unstable balance, one that didn't include the species people had hoped to save. Back on land, things got worse. In Europe, forests that had grown thick and tangled without human management caught fire during a dry summer. The flames spread faster than anyone imagined possible. Satellites captured the horror, entire regions glowing orange at night, smoke drifting across continents. There was no one to fight it. No fire crews, no water bombers, just trees burning, animals fleeing, and the wind carrying embers to the next untouched grove. Inside the arcologies, the mood shifted. The screens that once showed peaceful deer in parking lots now showed ash falling on empty playgrounds. Kids stopped pointing and laughing. Adults gathered in hushed groups, staring at the footage like it was a funeral. The worst part? It wasn't nature's fault. It was the absence of humans that was causing the damage. For centuries, people had messed up the planet. No one denied that. But they'd also, in small and often overlooked ways, kept things from falling apart. Farmers rotated crops to keep soil healthy. Rangers set controlled burns to prevent massive wildfires. Coastal communities cleaned beaches and protected turtle nests. Even something as simple as mowing a field kept certain invasive weeds from taking over. Now, with all that gone, the systems that had barely held together were collapsing. The council called emergency meetings behind closed doors. Voices rose. Papers were slammed on tables. "We thought stepping away was noble," one scientist said, voice shaking. "But we forgot we're part of this system too. Not just a virus. Not just a caretaker. We're woven into it." Another pointed to data from indigenous lands, places where people had lived in balance with nature for thousands of years. They never left, they said. They adapted. They listened. We didn't leave to heal the earth. We left because we were too tired to learn how to live with it. Outside, the consequences kept piling up. In Asia, rice paddies gone wild turned into mosquito breeding grounds, spreading diseases to nearby animal populations. In Africa, without anti-poaching patrols, even automated ones, rhino and elephant numbers began to drop again, not from humans but from unchecked predator shifts and territorial fights among wildlife, now crowded into shrinking safe zones. Even the air, once so clean, started changing. With fewer plants being pollinated because bees had lost the flower-rich farms they depended on, some regions saw a drop in oxygen production. It wasn't drastic yet, but the trend was clear. Remove one thread and the whole tapestry sags. Panic began to creep into the arcologies. Not loud panic, no riots or chaos, but a quiet, heavy dread. People stopped calling it the quiet miracle. Now they just called it the silence. And silence, they realized, wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes it was the sound of things falling apart when no one's around to hear them. Parents held their kids tighter. Teenagers asked questions no one could answer. Did we make it worse? Will Earth ever forgive us? Even the food tasted different, not because the recipes changed, but because hope had started to sour. The council knew they had to act. But what could they do? Sending people back wasn't simple. The arcologies were sealed for a reason, to keep humans in and nature out. Re-entry protocols required months of preparation, decontamination suits, ecological impact assessments, safety zones. And even if they opened the gates tomorrow, would it be too late? Worse, what if they went back and made things even worse? What if their presence, however well-intentioned, triggered another chain reaction? Doubt settled in like fog. One night, a group of maintenance workers stayed late watching a live feed from a camera in the Rocky Mountains. Snow was falling softly on an abandoned ranger station. A lone wolf stood on the porch howling into the wind. It wasn't a sound of victory. It sounded, "Lost, that used to be our job," one worker whispered. "Not to own the land. Just to be part of it, no one replied. But everyone felt it, the weight of a terrible mistake. Not because they tried to help, but because they thought the only way to help was to disappear. They had left with good hearts. But good hearts aren't enough if you don't understand the rhythm of the world you're trying to save. Now, the world was showing them the cost of that misunderstanding, and the most painful truth of all. Earth didn't need humans to vanish. It needed them to finally grow up. The turning point didn't come with a bang or a dramatic speech. It came quietly, like a crack in glass, barely noticeable at first, then spreading fast until everything felt fragile. Inside the arcologies, the mood had shifted from hope to something heavier. Regret. Not the kind you feel after forgetting an umbrella, but the deep, gut-wrenching kind that comes when you realize you broke something precious while trying to fix it. People still went to work, still ate their meals, still tucked their kids into bed, but conversations grew quieter. Eyes avoided screens showing the outside world. And the once popular nature feeds now played to empty plazas. The council, once seen as wise guardians, now walked with their heads down. Their messages, once full of cautious optimism, now carried a tone of apology. We acted with the best intentions, one broadcast began, but we failed to see the full picture. That admission hit hard, because it wasn't just about data or ecosystems, it was about trust. People had given up their homes, their routines, their connection to the earth, believing the retreat was the right thing. Now they weren't sure what right even meant anymore. Rumors spread faster than official updates. Someone heard a dam in Canada had fully collapsed. Another said entire forests in Australia were gone. Not from fire, but from disease that spread unchecked without human monitoring. No one could confirm everything, but the fear was real, and it fed on silence. Then came the protests, not violent, not angry in a destructive way, but deeply emotional. Groups gathered in the central atriums of the arcologies, holding signs made from recycled paper. Let us go back. We belong outside too. Don't abandon Earth twice. Some just stood in silence, holding jars of soil they'd saved from their old gardens, now dry and cracked. Others played recordings of rain, birds, wind, sounds most children had never heard in real life. The council watched it all, torn between caution and conscience. Opening the arcologies wasn't just a matter of unlocking a door. The outside world was unpredictable now, unstable. Radiation leaks from unmaintained sites, toxic algae blooms in rivers, collapsing infrastructure. Sending people back without a plan could be deadly, but doing nothing felt even worse. In a closed emergency session that lasted through the night, voices rose, then fell into exhausted silence. One member finally spoke what everyone was thinking. We thought leaving was the ultimate sacrifice. But maybe the real sacrifice is staying and learning to do better. That's when the decision was made. Not to rush back, but to prepare to return, carefully, humbly, and with open eyes. The great retreat would end. Not because it failed, but because it taught them something vital. Earth didn't need humans to disappear. It needed them to change. Announcing the reversal wasn't easy. Some feared panic. Others worried people would rush out recklessly. But when the message finally went public, simple, honest, and full of remorse, the response surprised everyone. There was no chaos. Instead, there was relief. A collective exhale, as if the whole arcology had been holding its breath for months. People began preparing, not with excitement, but with purpose. Training programs opened for ecological restoration, wildlife monitoring, and low-impact living. Volunteers signed up to study old farming techniques, indigenous land practices, and how to read the signs of a healthy forest or river. Schools shifted lessons from what we left behind to how we can return as partners, not owners. Still, fear lingered. What if they messed up again? What if their presence caused more harm? These questions haunted many, especially those who remembered the world before. The smell of gasoline, the noise of highways, the plastic floating in every ocean. They didn't want to go back to that. But they also couldn't stay hidden while the planet they loved struggled without them. One evening, a group of elders gathered in a quiet corner of the arcology. They'd lived through the worst of the climate crises, the heat waves, the food shortages, the storms that wiped whole towns off the map. Now they shared stories not of loss, but of small acts of care, planting trees in cracked city sidewalks, cleaning beaches after oil spills, teaching kids to compost. We weren't perfect, one said, voice soft but firm. But we tried, and maybe that's enough to start again. Outside, the world kept changing. Satellite images showed new green patches where fires had burned, but also brown scars where soil had washed away. Animals adapted, some thriving, others vanishing. Nature wasn't waiting for humans to decide. It was moving on with or without them. That truth stung. But it also clarified things. The council didn't issue grand promises this time. No, we will save the planet speeches. Instead, they said, we will listen. We will learn. We will serve, not control. Preparations for re-entry began in earnest. Teams designed lightweight biodegradable shelters. Drones were reprogrammed not to dominate but to observe and assist. Seeds from native plants, carefully preserved during the retreat, were packed into crates labeled for healing, not harvesting. People practiced walking on uneven ground in simulation rooms. They learned to identify edible plants, read weather patterns, and move quietly through forests. It wasn't about conquering the wild again. It was about remembering how to be part of it. And slowly a new feeling grew. Not hope exactly, but something deeper. Responsibility. Not the heavy, guilty kind, but the kind that comes from love. The kind that says, this is broken and I helped break it, so I'll help mend it too. The arcology doors hadn't opened yet. But inside, hearts were already stepping outside. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Mistakes would happen. Setbacks were certain. But this time, they weren't running away. They were coming home, not as masters of the earth, but as its students. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson they needed all along. The first human to step outside the arcology didn't do it with fanfare or speeches. There were no cameras, no crowds cheering. Just a single figure in a lightweight plant-based suit, boots laced tight, breathing in air that hadn't passed through a filter in over a year. The door hissed open, and for the first time in what felt like forever, real wind touched human skin. It wasn't a return to the old world. It was the beginning of something new. That first step was followed by hundreds more, carefully, slowly, like guests entering a home they'd damaged long ago and weren't sure they were welcome in anymore. People didn't bring bulldozers or concrete. They brought seeds, hand tools, notebooks, and listening ears. Their mission wasn't to rebuild cities or reclaim land. It was to help, not to take. In the Amazon, small teams worked alongside drones that mapped tree loss. But the real work came from hands in the soil, planting native saplings, not in neat rows but in patterns that mimicked how nature spreads on its own. They didn't clear brush. They watched how animals moved through the undergrowth and followed their paths. When a jaguar was spotted near a camp, they didn't panic. They quietly moved their tents and left offerings of clean water, a sign of respect, not fear. In the Arctic, others joined forces with communities that had never left, the ones who'd lived with the ice for generations. Together they placed sensors in the permafrost not to control it, but to understand its rhythm. They learned how to read the snow, how to tell when the ground was shifting, and how to stabilize it using old methods. Layers of moss, woven grass mats, and patience. No machines, just knowledge passed down and shared. Along coastlines, people didn't build seawalls. Instead, they helped mangroves grow back, planting roots by hand, clearing plastic that had washed ashore during the retreat, and watching as crabs and fish returned to the tangled roots. Children from the arcology, seeing the ocean for the first time, didn't splash in it right away. They sat quietly on the shore watching herons hunt, learning that wonder doesn't always mean touching. It sometimes means staying still. Life outside wasn't easy. Nights were cold. Rain came without warning. Food had to be grown, not dispensed, but there was a deep satisfaction in it, a feeling that hadn't existed inside the sealed walls. People woke up to birds, not alarms. They ate meals grown in soil they'd tended themselves. They got blisters, sunburns, and muddy boots, and smiled through it all because it meant they were part of something real again. The council didn't lead this new chapter. It dissolved itself quietly without ceremony. In its place rose something far more human: Earth Care Collectives. Small groups in every region made of scientists, elders, young volunteers, and even former skeptics who'd once thought nature could fix itself. They didn't make global rules. They shared what worked, learned from mistakes, and trusted local wisdom more than data alone. Inside the arcologies, life changed too. They weren't abandoned. Many still lived there, especially the elderly or those with health needs. But they became support hubs, not prisons. Solar-powered shuttles ran between them and the wild zones carrying supplies, medicine, and messages. Classrooms opened windows, real ones, for the first time in years. Kids learned math by measuring rainfall, history by walking trails once paved with asphalt, now cracked and blooming with wildflowers. One of the most powerful shifts was in how people saw themselves. They weren't saving the planet anymore. That language felt arrogant now. Instead, they spoke of healing with the earth, not for it. They understood that humans weren't separate from nature. They were a thread in its fabric. Pull too hard and it rips. Weave gently and it grows stronger. Mistakes still happened. A crop failed. A fire flared up. A drone scared a nesting bird. But this time people didn't hide or blame. They gathered, talked, adjusted. "We're learning" became a common phrase, not as an excuse but as a promise. And slowly the planet responded, not with instant miracles, but with quiet signs of trust. Bees returned to gardens planted with native flowers. Rivers ran clearer where people removed old pipes and let wetlands regrow. In places once silent, frogs began to sing again at dusk. The most surprising change wasn't outside, it was inside people. Without constant screens, schedules, and artificial light, they slept better. They noticed more. The way leaves shimmer after rain, the smell of pine in morning air, the sound of their own breath in a quiet forest. They laughed more, not because life was easier, but because it felt meaningful again. Years passed. The arcology still stood, but they no longer felt like the center of the world. The real heart was out there, in the fields, forests, coasts, and mountains where humans walked lightly, listened deeply, and gave more than they took. One evening, as the sun set over a valley where wheat once grew and now wild grasses swayed, a group sat around a small fire. No one spoke for a long time. They just watched the sky turn gold, then purple, then deep blue. A fox trotted past at the edge of the light, paused, looked at them, not with fear, but curiosity, then vanished into the trees. Someone finally whispered, "We're not guests here anymore." Another added, "No, we're finally home." And in that moment it felt true. Not because they'd fixed everything, far from it, but because they'd stopped trying to be heroes and started being humble. They'd learned that caring for the earth isn't about grand gestures or perfect plans. It's about showing up day after day, with open hands and a willing heart. The great retreat had been born from fear, but the return was born from love. And maybe that's what the planet needed all along. Not absence, but presence. Not perfection, but partnership. Now, with dirt under their nails and stars above their heads, people finally understood. We don't own the earth. We belong to it. And that's enough.